I walked into Colin Drake's office that Friday morning expecting a promotion meeting. Instead, he handed me a single page that would change everything. My hands shook as I read the words. My salary was being cut by 60%, effective immediately. I looked up at him, waiting for the joke, but Colin just smiled. "Consider it a test of your long-term commitment," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. The air felt thick. I couldn't breathe properly. "If this makes you rethink your place here, maybe you were never cut out for leadership." His voice was calm, almost cheerful. I'd spent 3 years building this company's financial strategy, saving deals he'd nearly destroyed, working weekends while he took credit at conferences. And now this. I thanked him quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. I stood up, walked out, and closed the door behind me. Back at my desk, I deleted the congratulatory email I drafted for my team. Then I opened a new document. I titled it Evidence and began typing. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. Through the 5th-floor windows, I could see Colin laughing with the executives, probably celebrating his power move. My mind raced through numbers. Rent, student loans, my mother's medical bills. Everything depended on that salary. 3 years of my life poured into a company that just slashed my income like I meant nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than money. Colin had hired me himself, praised my sharp mind, called me his right hand. I'd believed him once. Now I understood what I really was to him. Disposable. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Mr. Harrison, one of our board members. "Great job saving that investor call last night. You made Colin look brilliant again." I stared at those words until they blurred. Made Colin look brilliant. That's all I'd ever done, wasn't it? Made him look good while he collected the glory and the bonuses. I started the car but didn't move. Something inside me shifted from shock to something colder, sharper. I wasn't going to quit. Not yet. I remembered the day Colin hired me, fresh out of business school with a head full of ideas. He'd seemed impressed during my interview, asking smart questions about market trends and risk assessment. "You've got exactly what we need here," he'd said, shaking my hand. "I need someone who thinks 3 steps ahead." Those first months felt electric. He included me in strategy meetings, introduced me to investors, gave me real responsibility. I built financial models that transformed how the company made decisions. When my forecasts saved us from a bad acquisition, Colin praised me in front of everyone. "Avery's the reason we're still standing," he'd announced. It felt proud, valued. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The praise became less frequent. My name disappeared from reports I'd written. At investor meetings, Colin presented my work as his own. The first time someone told me, Colin said he built that model himself, I'd laughed nervously, thinking it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. That was 3 years ago. Looking back now from my car, I wondered how I'd let it happen so gradually. How I'd ignored every warning sign because I wanted to believe in him, in us, in the work we were supposedly building together. The news spread through the office like wildfire. By Monday, everyone knew about my pay cut. I felt their eyes on me in the hallways, heard conversations stop when I walked past. The pity was almost worse than the cut itself. Some co-workers avoided me entirely, as if bad luck might be contagious. Others offered awkward smiles and empty encouragement. "Hang in there," they'd whisper. Colin walked through the office that week like a king surveying his kingdom. He stopped by the break room where I was making coffee, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Avery's showing us what real commitment looks like," he announced to everyone there. "Sometimes sacrifice is necessary for growth." I wanted to pour hot coffee over his expensive suit. Instead, I smiled tightly and nodded. Let him think I was broken. Let everyone think that. Later that afternoon, I was filing papers near Colin's office when I heard him on the phone. His door wasn't completely closed. "If she quits, we save 6 figures, he said, laughing. "If she stays, she's desperate. Either way, I win." I stood frozen in the hallway, barely breathing. My hands clenched around the folders until the edges crumpled. That's when I truly decided. I wouldn't just survive this. I would win. I stopped reacting emotionally and started observing strategically. Every email Colin sent me, I saved in a separate folder. Every meeting where he took credit for my work, I documented with dates and witnesses. Every financial report he presented, I kept the original drafts showing my contributions. At home, I created detailed spreadsheets tracking every project, every investor conversation, every decision where Colin had overruled my advice only to fail later. I worked late most nights now, not just on company business but on my own project. My anger had transformed into something useful, something focused. I wasn't planning to report Colin or fight him in his own territory. I was planning something bigger. During the day, I smiled at his jokes, nodded during his speeches about company loyalty, and did my work quietly. But at night I was building a case. Not for a lawsuit but for something better. One evening, while searching through old files for a client report, I found something interesting. It was a draft investor report from 6 months ago, one Colin had presented to the board. I'd created the analysis, built the projections, written the recommendations. But in this version my name was gone. Every reference to prepared by Avery Holt had been deleted. Only Colin's signature remained. I saved 3 copies to different drives and smiled. The quarterly investor dinner was held at an expensive downtown restaurant. I wore my best suit and practiced my smile in the car mirror. Colin arrived 30 minutes late, loud and unapologetic, immediately dominating conversations. I stayed quiet, answering questions when asked, keeping my observations sharp. Mr. Hollister, one of our largest investors, asked me about the new market analysis. I started explaining the trends I'd identified when Colin interrupted with a laugh. Avery's great with spreadsheets, but strategy's my lane. He winked at the investors like we were sharing a joke. I smiled tightly and took a sip of water. But I noticed something important. The investors didn't laugh with him. Mr. Hollister looked uncomfortable. Ms. Chen, another major backer, raised her eyebrows slightly. They knew. Maybe they'd known for a while. After dinner, as everyone gathered their coats, Mr. Hollister pulled me aside near the exit. He glanced around, making sure Colin wasn't nearby, then spoke quietly. If you ever decide to go out on your own, call me first. He pressed his business card into my hand. I mean it. The smart money follows smart people, not loud ones. I thanked him carefully, keeping my expression neutral, but inside something clicked into place. I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Over the next few weeks, I began reaching out to other investors I'd worked with. Nothing obvious, just casual check-ins. How was their portfolio performing? Did they need any market insights? I never mentioned Colin or the pay cut. I didn't have to. In every conversation, patterns emerged. They were frustrated with Colin's leadership, concerned about his decision-making, worried about the company's direction. Ms. Torres confided that Colin had been dismissing her questions about quarterly performance. Mr. Peterson mentioned that several projections Colin had promised never materialized. He's great at presenting, Ms. Torres said carefully, but the follow-through isn't there. I listened more than I spoke, taking mental notes of every concern. The investors trusted me. They'd seen me fix Colin's mistakes, save failing deals, turn around disasters he'd created. They knew who really kept the company running. But they were locked into contracts, committed to investments they couldn't easily walk away from. Now, one investor, Mr. Brennan, was more direct. He's been hiding performance dips from the board, he told me over coffee. We're losing faith fast. If things don't turn around soon, we'll start looking for the exits. I nodded sympathetically. That must be frustrating, I said. Inside, I was already calculating timelines and possibilities. The foundation was crumbling beneath Colin's feet. He just didn't know it yet. I found an unexpected ally inside the company. Noah Fields was a senior analyst who Colin had publicly humiliated 6 months earlier, blaming him for a failed deal that was actually Colin's fault. Noah had stayed quiet like me, but I could see the resentment in his eyes during meetings. One evening we were both working late. I walked past his desk and noticed he was reviewing the same quarterly reports I'd been studying. "Those numbers look wrong to you too?" I asked quietly. Noah looked up startled, then nodded slowly. "He's been adjusting the projections to make things look better than they are." We started comparing notes, carefully at first, then more openly. Noah showed me internal documents where Colin had changed figures, inflated forecasts, and hidden declining performance. "If this ever comes out," Noah whispered, "he's finished." But I shook my head. Exposing him isn't enough. He'd just blame everyone else and land somewhere new. Noah studied me carefully. "What are you thinking?" Told him. "Not everything, not yet, but enough. About building something better, something honest. About leaving Colin behind entirely rather than just dragging him down." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I'm in," he said. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." Colin must have sensed something shifting because he called me into his office the next week. "Sit down," he said, not looking up from his computer. "Sep." He finished typing, then swiveled his chair toward me with that rehearsed smile. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" His tone was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "Everything's fine," I said evenly. "Just focused on work." He nodded slowly. Good. I want to make sure you understand how lucky you are to still have a seat at this table. A lot of people would have quit by now. Shows you've got resilience." I met his eyes without flinching. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said, meaning none of it. He leaned back, satisfied with what he thought he saw. A broken employee, too afraid to leave. "Keep up the good work," he said dismissively. I stood to go. As I reached the door, I heard him mutter under his breath, probably thinking I couldn't hear. "Let's see how long before she cracks." I paused, hand on the doorknob, and allowed myself a small smile before turning back. "Longer than you think," I said clearly. His head snapped up, surprised. But I was already walking away, leaving him uncertain for the first time. Noah and I started meeting outside the office, usually at a coffee shop across town where no one from work would see us. We reviewed contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and made absolutely sure every step we planned stayed legal. I'd learned enough from watching Colin to know that cutting corners would only hurt us later. We needed to do this right. "We form a new venture capital firm," I explained over coffee one evening. "Built on transparency, sustainability, real relationships with clients. Everything Colin's company pretends to be but isn't." Noah pulled out his laptop. "I've been modeling the financials. With the right investors, we'd be operational in 3 months. We talked about who else we could trust, which analysts might join us, how to approach investors without violating any agreements. Every detail mattered. One wrong move could sink us before we started. But the more we planned, the more real it became. We weren't just fantasizing about escaping Colin. We were building an actual exit strategy. "If we pull this off," Noah said, closing his laptop, "you'll own the future he thought he controlled." I stirred my coffee, thinking about that Friday morning in Colin's office. The humiliation, the smirk on his face. "We're going to pull this off," I said quietly. "He doesn't get to win." The call came at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mr. Hollister, sounding stressed. Colin had botched a major deal with a tech startup, promising terms he couldn't deliver and alienating the founders. Now millions were at risk, and the partnership was falling apart. "Can you help?" Mr. Hollister asked. "Colin's not answering his phone, and I don't trust his solutions anyway." I walked him through it, calmly explaining where Colin had gone wrong and how to fix it. I suggested new terms, outlined a recovery strategy, and connected him with resources Colin should have used from the start. 3 hours and a dozen calls later, the deal was saved. The next day, Colin sent a company-wide email taking credit for personally resolving a complex negotiation. He didn't mention my name once. But that evening, I received an email from Mr. Hollister. The subject line was simple. "Thank you." In the message he wrote, "We both know who really fixed that disaster. Keep me posted on your plans. When you're ready to move, I'll be ready to back you." I saved the email in a folder labeled New Beginning, and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Colin could take credit all he wanted. The people who mattered knew the truth. And when the time came, they'd remember. Colin announced another restructuring at the monthly all-hands meeting. My department's budget was being slashed again. "We need to streamline inefficiency," he explained smoothly, clicking through a presentation I knew he hadn't created. "This is about getting lean, staying competitive." More people would lose their jobs. More resources would disappear. All while Colin collected his bonus and upgraded to a corner office. After the meeting, I went to the records room to pull some old investor files. That's when I saw him. Colin was alone, feeding papers into the shredder. I recognized the documents immediately. They were investor projections from 2 years ago, ones I'd helped create, showing predictions that never came true. He was destroying evidence of his failures. I ducked back before he saw me, then pulled out my phone and took photos through the door's window. Not clear enough for proof, maybe, but enough to remind me of what I was dealing with. A man who didn't just fail. A man who erased his failures and blamed everyone else. That night, I told Noah what I'd seen. "We need to move faster," he said, "before he destroys anything else." He nodded. Our timeline accelerated. It was time to stop planning and start acting. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything. Every falsified report, every stolen idea, every moment Colin had blamed his team for his own mistakes. I organized it chronologically, added timestamps, included witness names where I could. Noah contributed internal projections showing the real numbers versus what Colin had reported to the board. We had enough to bury him. But as I looked at the growing folder of evidence one night, I realized something. Destroying Colin would feel good for a moment, but it wouldn't build anything. It wouldn't create the company I wanted to lead. It would just make me another person fighting in his mud. "We could end him with this," Noah said, reviewing the files at my apartment. I shook my head. "I don't want to end him. I want to outgrow him." Noah looked confused. "What's the difference?" Smiled. "Ending him makes him the victim of a vengeful employee. Outgrowing him makes him irrelevant. He disappears because no one needs him anymore, not because I destroyed him." Noah thought about that, then nodded slowly. "You're thinking bigger than revenge." "Always," I said. "We kept the evidence, though, just in case. But our focus shifted entirely to building something better. Something that would make Colin's company look small and outdated by comparison. That was the real revenge." The deal collapsed on a Wednesday morning. A major investment that would have saved Colin's quarterly numbers, one he'd been bragging about for weeks. I'd warned him about the terms 3 times. The investors weren't reliable, the timeline was too aggressive, and the projections didn't account for market volatility. He'd dismissed every concern with a wave of his hand. "This is why you handle spreadsheets and I handle strategy," he'd said. Now it was gone. In the emergency board meeting, Colin blamed market conditions, bad timing, forces outside his control. But I saw the board members exchanging looks. They weren't buying it anymore. That afternoon, Ms. Torres called me directly. "Not Colin. Me. We're reconsidering our commitments," she said carefully. "The leadership here isn't inspiring confidence." She paused, choosing her words. "If you ever wanted to lead something new, something better, we'd back you." Seriously. I thanked her professionally, promised to think about it. But I didn't need to think. I'd already decided weeks ago. That night I registered the business name. Atlas Point Capital. The name meant something to me. A reference point for navigation, a place to build from. Everything Colin's company wasn't. Noah and I drafted the founding documents. 2 other senior analysts, people we trusted, agreed to join us. We were really doing this. I typed my resignation letter at midnight and saved 3 copies. Formal, professional, impossible to criticize. I appreciate the opportunities I've had here and wish the company continued success. Nothing about the pay cut. Nothing about Colin's theft. Just a clean exit. The next morning, I printed it and walked to Colin's office. He was scrolling through his phone, barely looked up. What? I handed him the letter. He skimmed it, his expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something that looked almost like pleasure. Really? You're leaving? He leaned back, that familiar smirk returning. Some people just can't handle pressure, I guess. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to him anymore. Well, good luck out there, he said, dismissive. It's tough when you don't have someone protecting you. I walked out for the last time, collecting my personal items while co-workers watched with sad eyes. They thought I was broken, defeated. They thought Colin had won. At the elevator, I heard his voice from down the hall, talking to someone from HR. We'll spin this as her burnout story. Too much stress. Couldn't handle the responsibility. The elevator doors closed and I smiled. Let him think whatever he wanted. In 6 months, he'd understand what really happened. Atlas Point Capital set up in a shared workspace downtown. Nothing fancy, just clean desks and good Wi-Fi. Noah and I worked 18-hour days, building investor presentations, refining our pitch, defining what made us different. The 2 analysts we'd recruited brought their expertise and contacts. We were small but focused. Everything we'd learned from Colin's failures, we inverted. Transparency over secrecy. Long-term relationships over short-term gains. Honest projections over inflated promises. Our first pitch meeting was with Ms. Torres. I was nervous, but she smiled when she saw our presentation. This is what I've been waiting for, she said. Real leadership. She didn't commit immediately, but she promised to consider it seriously. Then Mr. Peterson asked for a meeting. Then Mr. Brennan. The investors I'd quietly connected with over the months started taking my calls. They wanted to hear about Atlas Point. They wanted to know our vision. More importantly, they wanted to escape Colin's sinking ship. Mr. Hollister was the one who changed everything. He agreed to meet at a restaurant, the same one where he'd pulled me aside months ago. I walked him through our entire plan, holding nothing back. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Let's talk seriously, he said. I think I've been investing in the wrong person. Our first major deal closed on a Friday morning. A tech startup needed growth capital, and we connected them with investors who understood their vision. Nothing massive but solid and real. Everything was done correctly, transparently, with contracts that protected everyone involved. When the deal finalized, I sat at my desk and just breathed. We'd done it. Atlas Point was real. That afternoon, Noah showed me his laptop. There was a press release on a business news site. New venture capital firm launches with backing from industry veterans. My name was listed as founder and CEO. It was real now. Public and official. I imagined Colin seeing it, reading my name, realizing what I'd built. The thought made me smile. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about proving I could create something worth building. That night, we celebrated at a quiet bar. Just the 4 of us, the founding team, drinking cheap beer and talking about next steps. No fancy speeches, no big egos. Just people who respected each other, building something together. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was Colin. Saw your news. Congratulations. We need to talk. Showed Noah. He raised his eyebrows. What are you going to do? I thought about it, then typed back. Sure. How's Tuesday? Colin stormed into the board meeting on Monday morning, furious. I heard about it from someone who still worked there, someone sympathetic to me. She's using insider knowledge, he'd shouted, pacing the conference room. She stole our investor relationships. But the board wasn't impressed. I'd left cleanly, hadn't taken any files, hadn't violated any agreements. Everything I'd done was legal and professional. The board chair had finally spoken. "We're reviewing your performance, Colin. Focus on that." The news spread quickly. Colin's paranoia was showing, and it wasn't a good look. Meanwhile, Atlas Point kept growing. We landed a second deal, then a third. Small but steady. Building reputation one success at a time. Investors who'd been lukewarm started returning calls. People who'd ignored our pitches suddenly wanted meetings. On Tuesday, I walked into a coffee shop where Colin was already waiting. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Tired eyes, wrinkled shirt, a desperate edge to his smile. "Thanks for meeting," he said, trying to sound casual. I sat down across from him. "What did you want to talk about?" He launched into it. Legal threats, claims I'd violated agreements, accusations about stealing clients. All of it desperate and empty. I let him talk. When he finally stopped, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of the falsified reports, the stolen work, the evidence Noah and I had compiled months ago. I slid it across the table. He opened it, and I watched the color drain from his face. "You wouldn't," Colin said, staring at the papers. His voice had lost all its confidence. I leaned back in my chair. "I don't have to," I said quietly. "You're destroying yourself just fine." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. He understood now. This wasn't a bluff. Had everything. "What do you want?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as it surprised me. I shook my head. "I don't want anything from you, Colin. I already have what I need." I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "Those are copies. Do with them what you want. But if you come after me or my company again, they go to every investor and board member you've ever worked with." I walked out, leaving him sitting there with the evidence of his own failures. The next week, news broke. The board had suspended Colin pending an investigation into financial irregularities. One of the other executives had found discrepancies in quarterly reports. The documents Colin had tried to shred weren't the only copies. Someone else had been keeping records too. Investors pulled their remaining funds. Contracts were cancelled. Key employees resigned. Colin's company began liquidation talks. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt free. The weight I'd carried for 3 years was finally gone. Mr. Williams, Colin's last major investor, reached out in early November. He wanted a meeting. Not with Colin. With me. We met at Atlas Point's new office. We'd upgraded from the shared workspace to a small but professional suite downtown. Nothing extravagant but ours. "I made a mistake backing Colin," Mr. Williams said simply. "I should have paid attention to who was actually doing the work." He proposed a partnership. His remaining investment capital moved to Atlas Point, in exchange for advisory access to our deals. It would triple our available funds overnight. I didn't answer immediately. Noah and I discussed it that evening, weighing the opportunity against the risk. Finally, I called Mr. Williams back. "We'd be happy to work together," I said. "Under one condition. Full transparency in everything we do. No hidden agendas, no false projections, no games." He agreed without hesitation. By December, Atlas Point had grown to 8 employees and had backing from 5 major investors. We were handling 6 active deals and fielding calls from startups across the region. We weren't huge, but we were established. Real. Growing. Then Colin called again. His tone was different this time. Humble. Almost pleading. "Can we meet? Please." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The meeting took place in Atlas Point's glass conference room. The same kind of office Colin used to lord over. He arrived on time, which was unusual for him. No expensive suit. No confident swagger. Just a man who looked defeated. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, sitting across from me. Noah was there too, taking notes. I'd learned my lesson about meeting Colin alone. He explained the situation. His company was done. Liquidation was moving forward. But there were assets worth saving. Client relationships, a few solid contracts, some technology investments. He wanted to know if Atlas Point would be interested in acquiring what remained. It was a business offer, but we both knew what it really was. Surrender. I let him finish his pitch. It wasn't terrible, actually. Some of those assets had value. But I wasn't going to make this easy. Why would we want pieces of a failed company? Yes. Colin flinched but pressed forward. Because you know what's valuable and what isn't. You built half of it. That much was true. I exchanged a glance with Noah. We'd already discussed this possibility. If Colin came begging, we'd be ready. I reached into a folder and pulled out a document our lawyers had prepared. I slid it across the table, watching his face. A buyout offer, I explained. For the assets worth saving. Everything else you keep. Colin stared at the paper for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The offer was fair, maybe even generous. But it was final. He'd have no control, no ownership, no say in how the assets were used. Everything he'd built would become part of Atlas Point. His legacy would be that he failed, and I succeeded with the pieces. There's one more thing, I said quietly. He looked up. I met his eyes, remembering that Friday morning 8 months ago. The smirk on his face as he'd handed me that pay cut memo. The casual cruelty in his voice. Consider it a test, I said, echoing his own words back to him. Of your commitment. The silence stretched between us. Colin's jaw tightened. He understood. This was poetry. This was justice. He picked up the pen. His signature was messy, rushed, like he wanted to finish before he changed his mind. When he slid the papers back, his hand was still shaking. I never thought, he started, then stopped. I didn't think you had it in you. I gathered the signed documents. That was your mistake, I said. You never saw me at all. He left without another word. Noah and I sat in the conference room after he'd gone, not speaking. Finally, Noah broke the silence. You did it. You actually did it. I looked out the window at the city skyline. We did it, I corrected. All of us. The buyout closed in January. Atlas Point absorbed Colin's worthwhile assets, hired 3 of his best analysts, and restructured everything under our transparent model. 2 clients who'd been trapped in bad contracts thanked me personally for the rescue. In February, we landed our biggest deal yet. A healthcare startup needed significant capital, and we connected them with investors who shared their vision. The deal made regional news. My name was mentioned as an emerging leader in ethical venture capital. A reporter asked me about my background. Kept it simple. I learned what not to do from bad leadership, I said. Then I built something better. Colin's name never came up. He didn't deserve the mention. By March, I'd hired 12 people. By April, 15. We were growing faster than I'd planned, but carefully. Every hire was someone who shared our values. Every deal was scrutinized for integrity. I never forgot the lesson Colin taught me, even if he taught it accidentally. Reputation is built slowly but destroyed quickly. Trust is earned through consistency. And real leadership isn't about control. It's about building something bigger than yourself. One afternoon, Ms. Torres stopped by the office. She'd become one of our closest partners. I'm proud of you, she said simply. This is what investment should look like. Those words meant more than any profit report. In May, Atlas Point celebrated its first-year anniversary. We threw a small party at the office. Investors, clients, and employees filled the conference room. Noah gave a speech about sustainable growth. Ms. Torres talked about ethical investment. When it was my turn, I kept it brief. A year ago, I was sitting in a parking garage wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, I said. Today, I'm standing here knowing exactly what I'm building. Thank you all for believing in this vision. The applause was warm and genuine. These weren't people impressed by flashy promises. They were people invested in real success. After the party, I stayed late in the office. My desk faced the window, looking out over downtown Denver. Lights glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Colin was probably applying for jobs, trying to rebuild his reputation, spinning stories about what went wrong. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel vengeful. Felt grateful. He'd tried to break me, and instead he'd freed me. The pay cut had been intended as punishment. Instead, it became the push I needed to risk everything on building something real. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. Saw the article about your company. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I smiled and typed back. Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you. That was true. Her medical bills had made me desperate. That desperation had made me brave. Atlas Point continued growing through the summer. We opened a second office in Austin. Our portfolio expanded to 23 active investments. Forbes mentioned us in an article about emerging venture capital firms. I was invited to speak at a conference about ethical investing. Life was busy, challenging, and exactly what I'd wanted to build. One evening in late August, I was working late when Noah knocked on my door. You should see this, he said, holding his laptop. It was a LinkedIn post. Colin had landed a job at a small firm in another state. Mid-level position, nothing glamorous. His post talked about new beginnings and learning from past challenges. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. Good for him, I said, and meant it. He'd learned something, maybe. Or maybe he hadn't. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. That night, several investors took me to dinner to celebrate a major deal closing. We toasted to success, to partnership, to the future. I looked around the table at these people who respected me, who trusted me, who'd chosen to bet on my vision. This was the victory. Not Colin's failure, but my success. Not revenge, but building something that mattered. As we left the restaurant, I looked up at the city skyline. The same view I'd had from Colin's office building a year ago, but completely different now. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. It was building something so much better that the past became irrelevant. And that felt perfect.